Welcome back to the Brew Bot Development Series, in which I attempt to make my own video game with only this render of Waluigi as my training. Last time, we figured out how to make Brew Bot punch and kill a cube that chases you, but it kinda feels mean just beating up cubes that can't defend themselves. So let's teach these cubes some fighting skills. I kinda had an idea of how I wanted to do this, but I hadn't worked on this project in a couple weeks, so I had no clue how to type anything anymore. But I pretty much want the cube to trigger an event when it touches me. I realized the best way to do this is with an area 3D, which is what Brew Bot uses also to punch enemies. So I'll scale this damage zone up slightly bigger than the cube's mesh and create a variable which references it in the script. Then I can try to remember how you scan for another object in this thing and see if it works. Well, it's picking up Brew Bot as well as the floor, so it's kinda working. I should be able to make this more specific by only having it print if the results contain the player. And after getting hit, we've got only Brew Bot being printed, which means now we have a condition for when the cube should hit you. So now, in that condition, I want to send a signal. But remember, I hadn't worked on this in a couple weeks, so I set it up completely backwards. But I did come to my senses and establish this new hurt player signal on the enemy's script, including variables like damage, knockback, and enemy. Then, under that hit condition, I can emit the hurt player signal and include values for those variables. I made a hitbox on Brew Bot as well, which is actually what's going to scan for the enemy rather than the other way around. I also learned that you can color these collision boxes, so I sort of color coded them. Then I made a variable to reference this new hitbox on Brew Bot, which I've confusingly named Enemy Zone. And I made an if statement which scans for enemies and prints them in the console, which does indeed work. But this ain't no text-based crap, we gotta make stuff happen now. I want to track who hit me, so I made a variable for the attacker. This should come in handy for receiving that signal we made, since you need to identify who it's coming from in this script. And I went ahead and left a comment over the code to keep things clear and readable. See, I do it sometimes. Now I can try to receive the hurt player signal from the attacker and connect it to a function, which we can make lower down on this same script. We'll go ahead and call it take damage, and include the signal's variables and its input parameters. That way we can have Brew Bot take however much damage and knockback that any particular enemy hits him with. Let's try and print the enemy variable and see what happens. If this prints, it means a whole lot of new stuff just worked at once. Well, stuff did print, but it's red. And it's endlessly roasting how wrong I set everything up. But if we get the parent of the attacker, it should work, because attacker is actually just getting the cube's hitbox. And there we go, it prints. And you know what? I'll take the errors too. I think they're pretty funny. Basically, these errors are saying that I shouldn't try to connect the signal every single frame that I'm being hit, since it's already been connected. So I somehow need to stop it from spamming that line over and over, which means throwing a bunch of variables and weird booleans around, which pretty much act as a tactically placed wrench in the gears. And now the error log finally stops whining. So now we can figure out what to do about the whole getting hit 200 times in a matter of seconds thing. I made a timer in the take damage function and a new invulnerable duration variable which it's going to use as its duration, which is pretty much like iframes between getting the crap kicked out of you. And I can make this function only be called when the getting hit variable has been reset, which it will be at the end of the timer. The enemy should also take 10 health away when it hits me, and I have my HP printing in the console, which doesn't work. And then it does, and he hit me 55 times. I think it's safe to say that the timer isn't working. So I messed around with that getting hit boolean a little bit more. I need to figure out exactly where it should and shouldn't be, so that once the signal gets into the function, it keeps all other signals from firing until the first one waits the timer out and flips the boolean open again. And now that it's set up in a decent configuration, the cube only hits you once every second. Sorry, cube enemy, no more 55 hit combo for you. Well, I think that works pretty good. Now let's make the cube knock you back. I found a really good forum response, which has enough to get me started on this knockback code. I set up the couple of variables that we'll need, and then a line which slowly decelerates the knockback momentum back down to 0, so you don't get rocketed into eternity. Then I can add knockback to the player's velocity. I'm skeptical of using this on the combat script and not the movement script, because it's probably just reading the velocity and not actually reaching across to reassign it. So if something goes wrong, this is probably why. Now I'll build the actual knockback direction, which is a line going from the center of the enemy out to the direction of Brew Bot. And just like that, when an enemy touches me, it knocks me back to the engine with an error. Looking down past those signal reconnecting errors that we apparently didn't fix that well earlier, it looks like it's upset about the knockback variable. So I made sure to specify that it's a vector 3 in the variable's declaration, which did nothing. That's when I realized that we already have a variable called knockback in this function. Whoops, let's rename that signal's variable to knockback power instead. Well, I'm guessing it's the fact that we're trying to set velocity on the combat script, so I'll move that over to the movement script, which is just kind of an active modifier to velocity, so that makes it really easy to move over here. I was really disappointed that this still didn't work, but then I jumped. Not bad! If it was up to me, this would stay in the game. So it seems like the ground friction is keeping him from feeling the knockback on the ground. So I'll just crank the knockback power up and... So I'll just crank the knockback power down and try it out. I would say that's just about perfect, but I should probably get rid of the moon jump, huh? Which is just as easy as specifying .x and .z on the velocity changes to exclude the vertical y-axis. And you know what? That's some pretty good knockback, but I want to have more visual feedback that you've been hit. So I snooped around for a way to make him flash red and found a material overlay option. I was able to make him red, but not his left arm. But I wasn't about to look up why material overlays don't apply to Brew Bot's left arm. So I carried on trying to make this overlay flash on and off. I really struggled to find a good parameter to keyframe, until I looked it up and learned that you can lower the alpha channel on the color itself and keyframe that. So I did that, and, well, it didn't work, and it was super weird and glitchy. The material seemed to want to default to red instead of transparent, so I remade the material and started with it transparent before any keyframing. And now I'm not permanently sunburned, and when getting hit, Brew Bot does flash red. This really helps make it feel like you took damage and aren't just playing bumper cars. But it sorta is still bumper cars if you can't die, so let's program some mortality. Or maybe we should go ahead and fix this stupid signal spamming thing real quick. Honestly, I don't even remember what I did right anymore, and I don't know if I did then either, but apparently it looked like this. The important thing is that we actually, for real, legit this time, don't get those errors anymore, for now. Alright, now it's time to die. Cause Brew Bot is more like an unstoppable force of evil that punches cubes for entertainment if he doesn't actually need to defend himself. Although just with this knockback, it already helps make this feel more like an actual scuffle. But it's not actually fair unless we... Man, these animations are freaking broken. Yep, we're getting sidetracked again. This time though, it's to make a new and improved walking animation. Debatable. So with great shame, I exported this half-baked animation and replaced the old one with it. I may not be getting better at making these animations look good, but I am getting better at making them. Now Brew Bot runs about 20% stupider, which I would say is progress in the right direction. Speaking of direction, I should probably be punching in the direction of the camera when standing still. So I threw in a little look at line, which turns Brew Bot to face the camera direction when you punch. This is really nice for when you're trying to walk away from an enemy while intermittently punching them. Not that you need to, because you're still invincible. Well, I'd say that's enough roadblocks to satisfy my urge to avoid the primary task at hand. Let's keyframe a sick, high-quality death animation and figure out how we're going to do this whole dying thing. I started by making that animation play whenever your health is gone and making a boolean called dead, and I set that boolean true when you die. Riveting. Then I just put the entire player movement script in an if statement that makes sure you're not dead, so you'll pretty much get locked out of all your functions. So let's go get beat up and die and see what happens. Even in death, you can't stop this guy from punching cubes, so I put his combat script in the same if statement to keep him from punching while you're dead. I also put his state machine in one of those statements too. We should be all good now. So I made a state in the state machine that you travel to when you die, and we get this, which I was able to repair into this. And this is actually pretty much good. We just need to raise the keyframes a bit so he's not through the floor. And there we have it. Although the cubes continue beating him up, so let's make sure they only do that while he's alive. That's better, but they're off to try and find another way of disposing of him now, so let's fix that too. The first thing I tried was making them only chase Brew Bot while he's alive, which did make them stop, but in a really weird, scary way. I gotta make some kind of home point that they return to when they're done chasing you, which I can make out of an empty 3D node that gets its location assigned to a variable on the beginning of the game. Then I can make a timer that runs while they're idle, which waits 1 second before moving back toward their home point. So now, if you escape their aggro radius, they run back to their home point. And of course, they do the same after myrtleizing you to death. I do want to be able to respawn though, so I found a line that resets the scene and made a new input on the enter key, which is when I'll fire that reset scene line, which works like a charm. The last thing to do is bring back a few of the physics features like deceleration and gravity that should act on you even after you die. That way I can slowly slide down a hill and think about what I should have done to avoid this. I also made sure that on the killing blow you still take knockback. Well, that's gonna do it for this week. We went from immortally punching cubes like a supervillain to having actual risk. Technically speaking, this is now functional combat. Now we've just gotta make it better. Anyways, I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.